Hello, Fantasy Fellowshippers, and welcome to the very first Fantasy Fellowship Con, taking place this weekend, September 2022. This is one of 12 author Q&As taking place over the next few days, along with 4 fantastic workshops. My name is Sally, aka Bookish Wondergoth. I'm one of the staff members here at Fantasy Fellowship and admin of the community Discord. I have here with me today the simply astounding Shelley Parker-Chan. Shelley is the author of the historical fantasy epic She Who Became the Sun, a reimagining of medieval China where the founding emperor of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Yangcheng, was assigned female at birth. The book is an emotionally charged, exquisitely written exploration of gender, politics, and divine power. And I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today, Shelley. So, did you want to
Thank you so much for having me.
very
after that, I'm not sure what else there is to say. Oh, well, I might do this. I haven't gotten to show anybody yet. You're literally the first people to see it. Please tell me what. It's see-through, and it's not fancy, but so
I think
anyway,
it's fancy.
That was cool. Yeah, it comes with a tiara.
Congratulations. A tiara? Wow.
Yes, but it hasn't arrived yet, so I couldn't wear it for you.
Oh, well, you'll have to send us a photo afterwards. And I think congratulations are in order for you as well, because you've also won recently the Sydney J. Bounds Award for Best Newcomer and the Robert Holdstock Award for Best Fantasy Novel at the British Fantasy Awards. So well done. You've been busy.
Thank you. It was a complete surprise.
Oh, really? Oh, well, congratulations, and well deserved. So let's dive into the Q&A now. I'll start with a question that I have, which is why that ending? I have not stopped thinking about it for like a year. I reread She Who Became the Sun in preparation for this con, and it hurt the second time just as much as the first time. So what do you have to say for yourself?
Yeah, well, my beta group of writers, when I presented them with the draft, they were like, you don't have to do this, you are the author. You can make choices. I was like, no, it has to be this way. It is the classic Chinese romantic tragedy structure. I feel like if you're familiar with the genre, from page 1 what's going to happen. It's just how is it going to happen? So I felt I had to stick to the classic beats. So there was no saving that boy.
Yeah, there's a lot of foreshadowing. You kind of feel like it's going to come, but it kind of makes it worse in a way because then you end up dreading it. But it was, yes. Anyway, Thank you. I'll try not to spend the next half hour screaming at you about Oh Young, who is my favourite.
So here he is, the cat boy version of Oh Young.
The cat boy, yes.
So cute.
For those of you who can't see, Shelley has an embroidery hoop of Oh Young in the background. I'm not sure if it shows up on your screen, but I can see it. Okay, so first question is from Erin, aka Athos. The Hongwu Emperor is a towering figure in Chinese history. How did you separate the story from the history? And are there any other historical figures whose story you would like to tell?
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, he's a fascinating character for sure. I think what I had to do when I start writing a book, I always start with archetypes. I never start with an individual person. I'm just like, I want a trickster figure. I want the tragic eunuch. I want the hot prince. And when I had already decided that one of the characters was going to be the Hongwu Emperor, I was like, what is the archetype of that person as opposed to that actual historical person? So he was this, Confucian patriarch, this military man, this terrible tyrant. And I was like, okay, so what do I want my archetype version of that to be? So it's quite easy in my head to keep them separated. So basically, I disregarded history. I kept the outline of, the ruthlessness and pretty much just everything else. So I didn't find it particularly hard. I like to use history as a jumping off point, and I don't get too bogged down in the details, which, if for better or worse, I find it fun. Because I come from fan fiction, so just like, okay. I'll take that and I'll I'll play with it and make it my own. Oh, and with other historical figures. Oh yeah, I totally. I love thinking about it. I don't know if I'd ever write them as books. But lately, I came across this great book of letters by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who is like he's a famous Stoic. Everyone's like, oh, the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. All the tech bros in Silicon Valley like love this guy, and he's always presented in his old age as bearded, very dignified. Pain will never hurt you. Just use rationality. And these letters are from him as a hot twink when he's like 19 years old, and he's desperately in love with his tutor, who's like this 40-year-old like orator, who's actually like a real stick in the mud. I don't know what he sees in them. But so Marcus Aurelius is like totally gay, like this twink who's like got a crush on his tutor. And
maybe it's
and then you have all these tech bros. Yeah, so I'm like, oh, the queer history of the great emperors. I love it.
I would read that. That sounds really good. Yeah, maybe it's the aloof distanceness of its tutor that allured him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like the power and the position, and this guy's very educated, and I think a lot of his humor does not come across to the modern day reader. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so talking about like what you've been reading for historical sources, and I've got a question here from Yelena, aka Narratrice Nessa. Yelena asks, what primary and secondary historical sources did you consult whilst researching and writing She Who Became the Sun? And I just wanted to add to this, were there any interesting LGBTQI plus as well?
I did a lot of research over a really long period of time, so it kind of all blurs together, and I did it in the most haphazard way possible. I just kind of, like a little magpie, went around and read what's shiny, what was interesting to me. I did read the Chinese classics to get a feel. I watched a shit ton of Chinese dramas, which I really feel like was research. I visited a lot of museums. There is a great author. He just died recently. I can't remember if he's American or British. His name was Jonathan D. Spence, and he wrote really accessible but really well researched sort of life stories of ordinary people. Like he had one of like this random scholar during the fall of the Ming Dynasty, and just really looks at what his life was like and reconstructs it. And that kind of thing was very useful because it gives you a sense of what people's lives were actually like outside of the history. I read all sorts of stuff. Read about the famine, read about eunuchs, read about, this, that, and the other. But
I bet the eunuchs was a fun read.
Yeah, except it really made me realize that I wanted to write fantasy eunuchs, not actual eunuchs. Like, nobody is, being made a eunuch in ancient China was quite brutal. Kind of everything got taken off. There are a lot of physiological side effects. So yeah, we'll just leave that out of my book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Queer history, I didn't read so much.
Sorry, it's a long process of osmosis over time.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to be able to imagine it, and then you can go from there without getting bogged down in the details. Like, I'm not interested in clothes, actually. So like everyone in my book's wearing polyester, and they all got like a long polyester wig that looks glorious. Like there's no male pattern baldness in my universe. I'm sorry.
Your descriptions of the world are so rich that I think my brain just supplied all that kind of stuff and quite adequately. I didn't even notice that you didn't describe clothes. I could just see it all so perfectly in my head.
It's like sea drama, hand waving.
So the next question is from a different Erin. What's the weirdest thing you've Googled for research?
Oh, I have Googled so many things. I'll tell you a weird one I've Googled recently. In the suburb I live, there is a street that I walk down every spring. So it's spring now in Australia. And I'm always like, God damn, this street smells like spunk. It's just the flowering trees. There's something really offensive about the smell. And I was like, oh, I'm going to put this in my book. And I'm sitting there Googling, like, what trees smell like semen? And it's a particular kind of decorative pear tree. And it is going in my book as a form of spite because I hate these trees. Were they in ancient China? I don't know, but they are now. Anyway.
It's fantasy. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, they had decorative pear trees. Did they have that particular variety that smelled so bad? I don't know.
Sounds repulsive.
There you
go. And then I was just wondering. So I was wondering what the most interesting fact you came across whilst researching She Who Became the Sun was. If you found any like unique tidbits that is unusual or unexpected.
I mean, there are so many random things. I mean, one detail that I have yet to be able to use that I really enjoy was the Mongol warriors, like, were great at really swift raids. They could like take a bunch of guys and travel hundreds of kilometers in like 5 days because they didn't have to carry any supplies with them. They drank the milk from their horses and they took meat with them that they placed under the saddle. And the combination of the movement of the saddle and the horse's sweat cured it into this like travel jerky, which sounds really kind of funky.
Yeah.
But the Chinese used to see these Mongols like taking meat from under their saddles, and they were like, the Mongols are eating their horses while they're still alive. Oh my God, these guys are the most terrifying and also disgusting, cruel people we can imagine. But it was kind of a misunderstanding. But I'm always like,
I'll say.
I wish I could use this fact. And also, I wonder what that meat actually tasted like. I guess we'll never know.
I can't imagine it tasted good.
Well, I mean,
must when you're on campaign.
Yeah, you know, they didn't have to light fires to cook. I mean, campaign food is shitty anyway.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to look out for that in future books that you write. This next question is from Sil. She asks, the magic and supernatural is very subdued in your novel and thus incredibly intriguing. So will we go deeper into this in the sequel, or will it continue to be like an undertone flavouring to a majority historical fiction novel?
That is such a polite way of putting it, because most people are like, where's the fantasy in your fantasy? And they get really like knobbed off and angry at me. Yes, it is very subtle. It was a later edition for reasons that perhaps I can talk about later. In the next book, it is more present. So it was a later edition in the first book. So I just kind of had to spackle it on top for various reasons. For the second book, I'm writing now, I'm still completing the edits on it. So I've had time to bake it in a little deeper into the story. So I think those elements are more present, but not necessarily more explained. I think they're there, and they are maybe more consequential. So we'll see more of them. But
I think
I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty.
More, yeah. I think it'll I think it will make more sense being more in the second book anyway, because of the way the first book ends. So I look forward to reading that anyway. And as for like low fantasy, that's my favorite kind of fantasy, so it did not bother me at all. Okay, so speaking of flavoring, everyone's favorite question, you once described fisting in your book as vanilla, so on Twitter. So on that note, can we expect any spicy scenes in book 2?
I feel I really have to clarify the vanilla comment. Like, I think what I was trying to say was that it is an incredibly consensual, romantic, and tender scene, which I deliberately tried to do because, there are particular sex acts which are associated with queer communities that have this shock factor. I really rather to try and get away from that and be like, people are exploring each other's bodies. There's nothing inherently shocking about anything that people could do with their bodies. So I was trying to move away from that, but people were shocked anyway.
It's just because you don't see it very often in fantasy
no one
books.
raised an eyebrow, actually. I was going
No.
to take it out purely for length purposes because my manuscript was way too long. And my agent was like, cut, 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 cut. And then I was like, okay, out with the sex scene. And then my agent was like, wait, put it back. So I put back the sex scene. And Tora were fine. Tora said literally nothing. The next book has so much more sex, but
Okay.
do not think it will raise any eyebrows. You know, I come from a romance background, so the sex scenes are very much exploring character, exploring relationship, using them strictly as a means of moving the story forwards. It is an epic fantasy. It is not actually a romance where I could spend 20 pages on a sex scene like romances do. So, needs must. I'll be like, they had sex, it's fairly brief, and we're moving along.
I really appreciated it being in there, actually. Like, you are right. It is a nice, tender scene, and it does bring us close to the characters. So, it didn't raise my eyebrows too much.
Yeah, I mean, once you've been on the fanfic websites, you've seen it all.
Yeah, exactly. And then going back to Still's question about it being very muted in your book, I was wondering what made you choose the fantasy genre rather than just doing like a straightforward alternative history. Why fantasy? Is it because you love fantasy, or is there another reason?
The answer is it was not fantasy. So I wrote a historical palace drama. But historical palace dramas have a very fantasy register. They are not realism. They are cathartic, escapist stories, where there are villains and heroes and people get their revenge. So they are very melodramatic, and they have very high stakes and exaggerated emotions, which are all things I personally love. So I was like, right, I'm writing a historical palace drama style of book. And I got to submission. It was like, what the hell is this? It reads like a fantasy, but there's no magic, and it's set in ancient China. Pick a genre. Either make it fully fantasy or make it more literary, I guess. And I was raised in the fantasy genre. I read all those 1980s kind of like Pern books and Star Trek tie-ins and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, my heart lives with fantasies, and it feels like a fantasy to me. It doesn't feel like a lit book. So, all right. And then like, okay, make it a secondary world or add magic. So I added some magic, which is actually really hard to do once you have an existing story, because magic begs the question of, why don't you use the magic to solve, plot problem X, Y, or Z? It changes too much. So I was like, okay, we're going to raise up the beliefs that already exist in this time, in fate and in the ancestors, and just kind of lift them to the surface to make them just visible, but not enough to really change the way things play out.
I suppose the magic is quite it's more like a showy magic rather than stuff that actually does.
Yeah, it can't do anything, because if it did something, then then you'd have to use it. That's just the rules of magic.
So next question is from Max. He asks, are you sure, I'm sure you are sick of this, but the book gave me strong Mulan vibes in places. How do you feel about this comparison, or was it something you were aware of as you worked on it?
I mean, when I was starting out, I just got the germ of the idea. Like, I did think of Mulan. The 1998 Disney, I mean, it's a part of my childhood, as it was for many people in the West. It was our Asian Disney movie. And the Disney version felt queer in a way that subsequently, when I watched a lot more of the Asian produced Mulans, the movies, they were not. And then I gradually came to understand, after reading a bit on the subject, was like, the original Mulan, the historical story, is not about gender. It's about nationalism. So it's about a girl who has to set aside her gender, not because she wants to, but because she needs to do a duty to her homeland, to the Confucian patriarchal system. So she sets aside her gender, she goes off, she fights the threat to that system. And then when she's defeated that outside external threat, she comes home to the system that she has preserved, the Confucian patriarchy, and she takes back on her female mantle. She never wanted to be a man. She never wanted to be genderqueer. And so I was kind of like, well, I do want to play with gender. So I'm going to write a story that has some of those same cross-dressing elements, but actually make it, about non-binary people and people who, they cross-dress because there's an opportunity to, but then there's actually because that's what they wanted to do.
I totally agree about
it's in conversation.
The Disney version being queer, because Shang is very clearly like the bisexual representation on Disney screen.
Whereas the Chinese versions, they always have this moment where the male love interest will see her bathing nude, before there's any other hint of romantic attraction. So like, no gay here, just making sure that he knew she was a girl all along. And I'm always like, you wusses, you wimped out.
So speaking of films, this is a question from Leah. She asks, "Hi Shelley, reading She Who Became the Sun reminded me of some Lucia movies that I've watched before. What are some of your favorite Lucia or Ciencia dramas, movies or novels that you'd highly recommend while we wait for the sequel to She Who Became the Sun?"
So I often get asked this question, and ironically, I don't like wuxia or xianxia as genres. Like Chinese fantasy has many subgenres, or Chinese TV dramas, come in many flavors. I'm just not a big fan. Wuxia, it has its distinctive elements. Like we know it has the Jianghu is this like world of bandits on the fringes of government control. There's vigilantes, there's heroes, there's martial arts sects. I don't know, it's just not for me. No shade on the great authors of those genres. And Xianxia is like, the Taoist cultivation and the immortals. And it's also kind of not for me. I am like a historical palace drama person. I'm a basic bitch. I just love melodramatic soap opera stories. So everyone's like, what's your favorite wuxia? And I'm like, Anyway, there is one I really like. It's called Strange Hero. It's from back in 2010, and it has Wallace Huo in it. It's set in the Ming Dynasty. It's got this classic. It's this guy who was like in the government, and he gets framed for a murder he did not commit, and he has to go off and be a vigilante, and he gathers together his posse, and they go around like doing crime to benefit the poor. But it's very charming. I feel like it's one of the classics. It's on YouTube, so you can probably find it there. My favorite, when people ask me, what were your inspirations? They were films and books and stuff, but it was stuff like Hero by Zhang Yimou, which is this big sweeping tale of the ascent of the first emperor, like nested stories where there is martial arts in there, but it's set in a historical military kind of context. So that's the kind of thing that I like. Wuxia. You should read Zen Cho's Order of the Pure Moon. It's wuxia set in the Malayan emergency when was that? The 1950s, post World War II in Malaysia, before it was decolonized. It's kind of flavored by Star Wars, but it's very both Malaysian and wuxia, so it's amazing. I really enjoyed that one.
Hopefully Leah has lots to choose from there. This next one is one of my questions. I mostly just want to pick your brains about Zhu and Ouyang, basically. So despite their similarities in many ways, and Zhu makes a couple of comments that like they're cut from the same cloth, and they appear to have opposing arcs. So Zhu seizes her fate whilst Ouyang like dreads it and fears it, and then Zhu's desires bring her closer to her destiny, whilst Ouyang's are an obstacle that he needs to overcome. So which scenarios did you craft with this in mind? Was it important to you to get them to like, when they finally meet up, it's one of my favorite bits of the book. So just wondering your thoughts on this whole situation.
That was a fun moment. I think this is the area where critics or readers are much better at identifying overarching, arcs and themes. Like when I was writing it, I was not necessarily crafting scenarios in that way. I had an idea that they were definitely opposites. I had ideas that they were going in different directions. I think
So like
I
you go
was very
forwards, I'll go
aware that they
backwards kind of thing.
started. Yeah, they start at a similar point. So each of them, as a fairly innocent child, for reasons outside of their control, is given a choice to live or die. And they both choose to live. But Ouyang chooses to live for other people. So his sole reason for staying alive, is for honor, to bring back pride to his family, to have revenge. So it's always for reasons outside of himself. Whereas Ju is far more selfish in a way, or she's individualistic.
Yes.
She chooses to live for herself, regardless of what other people will think, regardless of what she might have to inflict on others in order to live, regardless of the fact she has to steal a fate to do that. So I only really thought of their start points and then tried to logically follow them through. And that did lead to meetings at various points in the book where you can sort of see that they are similar but different.
I love when they I don't know. Their meetings are so exciting, and there's like loads of dramatic irony going on as well. It's stunning. I love it.
I mean, dramatic irony is one of my favorite tools. It also gives like a good mic drop moments, which so I've just been writing the sequel, and it's a massive book, and I've just been suffering and suffering. I finally got to the second last chapter, and I'm like, the last sentence of the second to last chapter, I'm like, it was all worth it. 770,000 words just for like this one line. I'm just like, that was good. Yeah, so in book one, that line was in when there's the duel that Ju loses. So there was a good line there. I was like, I wrote that. Now everything is worth it.
I'm so excited for the sequel. It's going to be one of those.
It's nearly done. It's nearly.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. And then we have a question from Rayla. Rayla asks, what are your thoughts on writing a point of view character whose gender and sexuality have been permanently altered without their consent?
Oh, this is such an interesting question. And it's so like complicated, right? Like, can you alter someone's sexuality without their consent? I don't know. So you can argue, I suppose, that society is altering.
He kind of removed, in Ouyang's case, like removed the ability for him to have sex. So I guess that does kind of impact his sexuality. Sex to a certain extent, I should say, because obviously he still could participate in activities.
There's a lot of things you can do. Yeah. No, the question of having your gender altered without your consent was definitely something I was thinking about as I was writing this. I guess the thing is there are so many potential scenarios in which that can happen. Like it happened in a particular way in this book. You have to write the specific case of this person because like there are many eunuchs throughout history. I said like Ouyang is a fantasy eunuch. It's not really strictly medically and historically speaking. He's not a true person or anything. But like of all the people who are made eunuchs in Chinese history, of which there are lots, there's a huge variation in how it happened and then how those people dealt with their lives afterwards. Like you had people who it was done without their consent when they're extremely young. And like you might have like the castrati in England or Italy who had those beautiful voices. They were castrated. You had people who had it done as punishment when they're already adults and had developed a sexuality and had relationships. You had people who saw it as a means out of poverty and maybe thought that was an acceptable trade-off and could come to terms with it. You had eunuchs who married. You had eunuchs who were in the palace like harem bonking all the like concubines, and there are ways of doing these things. So there's such a wide spectrum. So it was important to me that I made Ouyang a very specific person and not say this is a generalized case. He had a particular personality and then he had a horrific trauma done to him. and that trauma also occurred in a very specific cultural context, and then we have a character come out the end of that. But, you know, had it been anyone else, had it been a different point of time, you know, things would have been different. But
we've crafted him very well. He is my favorite. Yeah, I
he's
love
not
his
my
point of
favorite.
view. He's not yours. I know who your favorite is.
No, he's a trash bag.
Isn't it?
Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Everyone's attached to him, and I'm like, oh, he's the worst.
Is your favorite Wang Guosheng? Is that your? Yes. Okay, I know we're going to hear more about him in book 2 from watching your Twitter. I'm running out of time now. It's coming up to 11:30, so we're just going to ask 2 fun questions and then we'll wrap up, if that's okay. So one of the second to last question from Steph. Zhu's world is quite bleak. If you could give her a vacation in any other fantasy realm or universe, where would it be and why?
You know, I really think that she flourishes in her rather bleak world. You know, she's the kind of character who would not do very well in other situations in which she would be a sociopath. She's well adapted. And also, a lot of the fantasy worlds are just as bleak. I wouldn't want a vacation in any fantasy world. Like, would you?
The only fantasy world I've ever said that I'll go to is Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and everything else is bleak as fuck. So
like Becky Chambers writes those very soothing science fiction novels in which everyone's very nice and you kind of explore a world and nothing horrible happens. I would like to see
if Zhu went there, she'd just exploit everyone.
Yeah, I think I would like to see her pop into the Matrix just because I want to see what kind of badass like latex-based costume she comes up with. And also what her gender presentation would look like in the Matrix. I think that would be fun.
I would really like to see that. Please write that one day.
It's not really like a vacation.
No, it's not. But it's, you know, we would still like to see it regardless. And she'd thrive, as you say. So we're coming on to our last question now. So we are hosting a readathon in October called the Battle of the 5 Worlds. We're asking our authors all to submit a prompt each, so it's a little bit of friendly competition between the authors. You can sort of try and outdo each other, but basically the people in taking part in the readathon will choose one of 12 given prompts to win 6 points for their team. So are you able to provide us with your prompt?
A main character who is missing part of their body.
Ooh, I like that.
I can think of several. So people had better not say there are none.
No. Well, I think last readathon we did, so we had this readathon before. One of the prompts was to read like a disability prompt. So I can think of a few where there's like missing limbs or parts. So I don't think people will struggle. Thank you so much. It's a great prompt. So yes, Shelley, thank you so much for giving up your time to answer all of our questions, and thank you everyone who's watching for joining this interview, which is one of our Fantasy Fellowship Con events. We have other interviews and workshops on the schedule, which you can see on our website, which is www.fantasy-fellowship.co.uk/con 2022. Remember to follow us on Instagram, where we are fantasy_fellowship, and on Twitter, where we are @fanfellowship. If you found the convention Discord for this event enjoyable, we also have a community Discord where you can chat all things bookish and be kept up to date with what's next. So thank you again, Shelley. It's been amazing to pick your brains. And see you around, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.